Welcome back, everyone, to another Grow Support Conversation. I'm your host, Neil, and I think we got a really cool conversation for you today. I'm joined by Rolf Middendorp, the co-founder of Dology and previous manager of cloud platform support at Google and APAC manager of support and operations at Stripe. We're going to talk through some really cool topics, but really it's all about scaling creatively, and I'm excited to jump in. Let's get into it. Well, Rolf, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it to have a conversation around ticket prevention and GenAI and customer service and where we're going and where things are headed and best practices there. For those who don't know you, can you tell me a little bit about where you came from in support and where you're at now and the things that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. I'm pleased to be on your podcast after listening to quite a few of those. I think you have a really interesting series, so I'm honored to be here. It's really cool. And my story is interesting because it seems you have a theme there with other people as well. But I sort of accidentally ended up in support and customer service, and I stuck around there. I really like it, and I've made my career on it since. It actually started back in the days when I was at Google about 14 years ago now already, where I was basically managing an account management team for Google in Europe, for Google Apps, as it was called at the time. And I saw an opportunity opening up to help build out the cloud platform support team, which was the team that was going to support the cloud computing services at Google. And it was very new at the time. It was literally, I think they came up with a name only a few weeks prior. And I joined that team, which was very small. It was very like a real sort of pioneering under the radar kind of team at the time. And then I helped grow that team from just a few people that we were up to several hundreds of people in support. Like I think it was about 200 and something people internally, and then a few hundred external people through contact centers, through BPOs that got involved as well. I really got the taste for support there. So I moved on to Stripe a little bit later, where I did something similar for the support and operations team in Asia. I built that out, and I made sure that the teams were up and running there for some time. And then a few years later, when I realized, like, hey, wait a minute. I've always been saying that at some point in time, I want to start my own business, my own startup. And I thought it was time to do so. So I left my job at Stripe with no more than a long list of what I thought were good ideas, as it goes, like good startup ideas. And funny enough, actually, the best idea was in customer service space again, like in the support space, like where I came from. And it was all around the knowledge management within teams, because I believe that is critical for support teams, but at the same time very broken, and there's a lot of friction there. So I set out to solve that, and that turned into my current startup, Dology, that we're working on at the moment. So, anyways, that's in a nutshell my story, how I accidentally ended up in support and stuck ever since.
I love it. I mean, especially, we always say it, that people always fall into support, and then you find a place and a home in it, and it always just kind of sticks with you as you go, which is very exciting. Sure. It sounds like you've had quite the journey.
Yeah.
Obviously, scaling cloud support from a very, very small team to hundreds, and then helping Stripe get set up in that region and being able to grow those teams. Is there something that you found that was common between that scaling experience that made it successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Many things. And I love how you say that made it successful, because somehow, I don't know if you recognize the feeling, but if you're in support, you always feel that you're not doing good enough, right? Like that you're always still one step behind. The backlog is always too big, and the CSAT is always a bit too low, and so on. So
always.
You have to, you have to, I think, really look at a more holistic definition of like what is successful. But I think, what I always understood is that scaling a support team is you're not scaling the team just for the sake of hiring more people, right? Like hiring more people and scaling the team in terms of like the actual number of people that gets involved, or that's on your queues, is actually the result of the growth of the number of tickets that comes in. Obviously, it sounds really logical, but somehow in a day-to-day interaction, we always talk about number of people instead of like talking about the ticket growth. And one measure of success that I always found really important is to look at the relative growth of the number of tickets in comparison to the growth of your user base. And of course, I was always lucky that I was in tech companies that were growing a lot because of all sorts of reasons. There were like we were onboarding customers by the hundreds or thousands rather than just individual numbers. So we were actually very sure that the support volumes would continue to rise and continue to grow. But the real challenge there was like, how do you make it so that your ticket volume grows non-linear? So that means like for every new customer that onboards, you want to have relatively less tickets coming in. And I think both at Google and at Stripe, we were very focused on that. And that was also always a very big priority of mine, because that's the only way in which you can, at the end of the day, set up a sustainable support business. Otherwise, you could just plot out linearly, like, okay, if we have 10x the number of customers in, let's say, 10 years, our team size needs to be 10x, much bigger, and it becomes very overwhelming very quickly. So you start to, if you think about it, of like, okay, how do we bend the curve of the number of tickets coming in? We know that it will still grow, but how do we relatively grow slower than the rest of the company? That makes you look at the volumes in a different way, and it makes you very creative about how you want to solve those tickets and how you want to treat the support operations going forward.
I mean, yeah, especially I love this, because when you're thinking about it, you're not just thinking about it in terms of workforce management of, hey, we have this many tickets, we need this many people, it's great.
Yeah, exactly.
And how can you take that existing team, even if it's the same size, and leverage them for longer in a still effective way, looking at it in terms of that contact rate between your users base. Is there something specific that you did to keep that contact rate low and kind of plateauing rather than this linear line?
Yeah, so we I made sure that my team's always focused on ticket prevention, as I would call it. And what I mean by that and how I define it is they should, obviously, first priority if a ticket comes in is to help the customer and give them a great experience, and give them the answers they're looking for, present them with the facts and the knowledge they need to move forward or resolve the issue in the back end that got them stuck. So obviously that is your first priority, to help the customer and get them in a happy place. But then the second priority, and it's still a priority, like it's just the order of priorities, but definitely the priority was to then do a bit of an analysis for every ticket and say like, hey, what is the root cause, or what is the underlying reason for this ticket to come in the first place? And when I say it that way, and especially I know when people hear the word root cause, they immediately think of large documents with endless analysis and a lot of work and so on. But I see it more as like a muscle memory, that every time they got this particular issue, that they started thinking creatively, and also like that my team members would put themselves in the shoes of the user or of the customer, and start thinking creatively about what would have needed to be true, or what would have needed to be done to make it so that this ticket would not have had to be created in the first place. How could we have prevented the need to create this ticket in the first place? So I know maybe a simple example is where people they want to change payment methods. It's like a common example, like, oh, I have a credit card on file, I would like to use a direct debit for my bank account instead, and it's a bit confusing because I don't know, something in the interface is wrong, or it's complicated terminology. Like if once you handled such a ticket, once you helped the customer, you either set up the direct debit for them, or you gave them the instructions to do so. You should really think about like, okay, what is the product experience then that led the customer to being confused? If it's the terminology, then maybe we should use more explanations in the process and in the sign-up flow, put a few more explanations left and right to help the customer. Or if it's something else, and always I always encourage my teams to then file these kinds of nuggets of feedback with the respective product and engineering teams, because it feels a little bit like extra bureaucracy and extra work to do so, but it's really important for those teams as well to use the customer service team as the eyes and ears, let's say, of the product team, and understand where customers are running into. And it's very easy in the support team to get into the mode of like, okay, we solve all the problems for them, and we make those problems disappear. They can all set up the direct debits without any problems. But actually underlying, you still have that problem where people run into the same question over and over again, and different users have the same question all the time. So if you don't pass that on, if you don't actually take that second priority of passing along that feedback and making the product better that way, or making the service better, you will not actually bend that curve going forward, and you're just scaling linearly, and you're going to run yourself into dead end at some point where you just can't keep scaling. Anyways, that was like sort of the mental mind shift that I was trying to accomplish with my teams all along.
That's huge. I think the framing there is really, really important, that you say it is what could have been changed or been different to prevent this ticket from happening in the first place. It is it could just be the verbiage or the wording that's on the site. It doesn't need to be some crazy technical new product or some huge
Yeah,
thing. It could
exactly.
just be
Yeah.
clarity and awareness around the information that is there and is available, which I think is really huge. And it's not what I love that you say it's thinking creatively about how this problem could be solved rather than, hey, let's just push them off so we don't get the ticket in the first place. Let's push them
Yeah.
towards self-service
Let's
and
just
go
resolve
from
the
there.
problem and forget. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think a big clarification there is it is what could have prevented this in the first place rather than let's deflect this and push it off.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a huge difference between prevention and deflection within this framing?
It's day and night difference. And I think deflection is sure it's preventing the ticket from actually reaching you, but it's not preventing the ticket or the underlying issue that led to creating a ticket. It doesn't lead to making that disappear, right? So the actual issue or the problem is still there. The user ran into it, but by deflecting it to, I don't know, a help center or like making it harder to find the phone number, or inserting a bot which you have to ask 3 times to be connected to a person or something like that. Like you're not solving the issue. The issue is still there. It's just you're making it harder to actually end up in your inbox, which might feel good in the moment because your team seems to be on more top of their inbox, obviously. But the customer experience is still not good. It's still not there. And that's why I always. It's a good point that you bring it up. Like I always try to explain to teams, like it's not about deflecting the cases, right? Like it's not about like trying to make sure that the ticket doesn't reach us. It's about trying to make sure that the ticket or the underlying reason for the ticket doesn't happen. And it's a significantly different way of approaching the work as well.
Yeah, that's huge. And if you think about it internally as well, one of the things that I have while I'm trying to scale my team now, looking at, that workforce management aspect of let's start reducing the volume of work we need to do so that as a team we can work more effectively. Looking at it internally from an agent experience, also looking at it the same way of, hey, what's all the busy tasks and information that you have that we can kind of start to automate and cut off of your side internally to be able to support you as an agent doing it better as well. But looking at it in terms of this preventative framing aspect really focuses and also makes it more customer centric in terms of actually improving your product and building that experience for them rather than just, hey, we just don't want it, which I think is huge. Thinking internally about how to support your teams and start automating maybe some of those, busy tasks and some of those types of things around the information that's there. You mentioned that you just recently founded Dology as well, which focuses on knowledge management as an AI solution as well. Mm-hmm. Can you talk me through a little bit about your thoughts around how AI supports teams internally?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what we're doing with Dology is that we use AI. We're an AI-driven startup, but we use it probably slightly different than most AI startups do. Like we. Maybe to take one step back, like when I left off, as I said earlier on, with my my list of what I thought were good ideas, which turned out not to be so good ideas in some cases, and then this particular one, maybe hopefully is a bit better one. But my original observation was that a large part of the work that happens in support teams is around transferring knowledge between mostly human beings, right? That's what we interact with most of the time. And it could be anything from really between the team. If you have a team member who's really specialized in one particular aspect of the product and is really good at solving those tickets, there's always a lot of friction to get that knowledge out of their heads into the heads of all the other team members, right? You have to document it, you have to give trainings, you have to give peer-to-peer sessions, experience. Oftentimes you just have to wait for people to do the work for many months, and then they will start to absorb the information from one person to the next and so on. But it could also be the knowledge transfer from the team or from the customer support team to the customer. And that is oftentimes what you see in help centers, how-to guides, in product help, right? Like anything from like the guided tours, guided introductions in the product, to better descriptions, better help bubbles, and so on. It's at the end of the day, it's a lot about like educating and transferring that knowledge left and right. And I realized like, hey, it's so hard right now. That's oftentimes where teams get broken, especially if you start scaling your team. It becomes so hard to actually scale that knowledge across the entire team. And then you start to see that people start to split up in different specializations, that people know a lot about fewer topics. And then you get into the trouble of like, not everyone can handle all the tickets anymore, and all sorts of dependencies. It makes it complicated. So I started digging into that. I was like, hey, how can we make that particular area better using technology, using software? And obviously the AI came up. Well, actually, it came up years ago already, but it became really famous in the last, let's say, 1.5 years. So that's what people know it from being good at generating answers and generating responses. But I realized, like, wait a minute, there's actually one step before that. Like, we need to get computers to become a lot better at collecting all the knowledge in the different places and scraping that from all the corners of the team. So from the minds of people, and from every single Slack thread and conversation, to every single email that went out to every single customer, to maybe support forums or public, if you do social media support, for example, sort of the one-to-many channels, there's nuggets and snippets of knowledge and information and insights hidden in all those places. And oftentimes the real challenge is that human beings cannot reach into all those places to collect that knowledge and collect that information. And I realized, like, wait a minute, that's exactly where computers are good at, and where the AI is good at, like getting trained from large data sets and large amounts of data, and extracting from that data exactly what we need to make it useful. So with my co-founder, we started solving this in a more scalable way by actually by actually looking at where all those sources of knowledge were, injecting them into our model and into our algorithm, and then generating the right form of knowledge at the right time. Because that's oftentimes what's happening when you try to train your coworker. You need sort of a training material with the same kind of knowledge as what would otherwise be in a help center to explain to a user, but it's a different form, right? Like, you have to transform it between the areas. Or if you have a guide, or if you have a chatbot where that answers the questions, like every time it's the same corpus of knowledge, let's say, the same base of knowledge, but in different forms and shapes. And that's what we've been focusing on, and that's what we're trying to solve to make teams significantly more efficient by using our tooling. Yeah, sorry, I get excited about it. I can always go on for hours.
I feel it, especially as well if we tie it back into utilizing teams more efficiently and effectively through this kind of creative problem solving for ticket prevention, being able to save them time and documentation, being able to split that knowledge from a tribal knowledge of, hey, I know this and you know this, and we're going to talk about it, but it's not documented. Really being able to save them time on that documentation, on that building, really allows you to also spend more time on that creative problem solving and identifying those needs for customers of, hey, we know that this is a problem. We know that we could have prevented it here. Now let's go and fix it. Now they have more time to be able to do that. And so
exactly.
It's really interesting when you think about scaling support. There is, let's level out the number of tickets compared to the user base. Let's start finding that contact rate, find balance and nice area. And then let's also focus on saving our team's time so they can actually build more value. So always reducing friction, building value for that member experience or customer experience is always the most important thing. How you achieve that in a one-to-many kind of format and stage there. One of the things that you mentioned to me as well before was, hey, I have a different idea because it's not about GenAI taking over the customer experience and doing that, and it is more about supporting agents in that aspect. What do you think is kind of the direction, since you're in the middle of it? I'm obviously not using a lot of AI tools now or anything, but since you're in the middle of it, what are you seeing in that aspect?
No, exactly. Many people, when they think of AI, they immediately think of the robots taking over from us, right? Like the work is going away, and I think there's, especially in the support and customer service areas, there's quite a bit of anxiety, I would say, from people as well, that they think like, oh my God, is this going to impact our future in a way that the work is going to go away from me, or it's becoming maybe robotic or not interesting? And I think yeah, people are trying to wrap their heads around it. But I'm from a more optimistic school of thought, let's say, which is that actually I think AI is going to make the work a lot more interesting and a lot more fun rather than less. And like two things. I think the first one was that's really funny. I was thinking about this a little while ago. They're doing construction work in my street. Like literally, the whole street here in front of my house is open, and they're taking out the old streets and the old stones and putting new ones in and so on. And I realized that there's every day, it's a long street, but every day there's only a few people at work in that street, because these people are operating these heavy machinery to actually do all the work for them, right? Like they have the diggers and they have the big trucks and so on and everything. So they're doing a lot of work with very few people, and they're operating those machines left and right, so they can actually cover more space and more surface area, let's say, with the few people than when they would not have the machines. And I think that's the first thing you'll see with AI, what's going to happen, so that the AI is going to help us and augment us and make us more impactful and more powerful at the work that we're doing. We're also, the support people will be able to reach a bigger service level, both in terms of volume, that you can actually just get more tickets done per day, but also more topics, right? Like I said before, oftentimes knowledge would be hidden in corners that you don't know about, so you can only, let's say, do this much of the spectrum of tickets that you know enough about to be helpful. But then at some point, the AI tools will actually make you knowledgeable about many more things, or potentially knowledgeable about many more things, so that you can actually cover a larger scope of tickets. So I think that is a very important one that we're actually going to do a lot more work. And then the second part is more around how can I explain this? Like, I think also you're going to get more. Well, actually, the customers are going to get more higher expectations from support, because similar as that, we now expect that a small crew of people will be able to do the complete resurfacing and reconstruction of a street. We will also expect that small support teams for even small players, so let's say the non-Amazon sized e-commerce players or anything like that, that those small support teams will be able to get to a place where they can still provide like the same level and the same quantity of support as the large players. So you see that at the same time as that people, that the support team members are getting more effective, I think that the customer expectations are rising as well, and both in terms of volume and quality of service is going to, or is already rising a lot. So I think that the net effect is not that we're going to have less tickets or less work, right? Like I think our customers will still want us to help them out, and even more so now in the AI age than ever before, right? They have no excuse anymore to not pick up the phone and not have chats and not have tickets resolved and answered within minutes. So the net effect is that we still have the same amount of work done, but it's going to be so much more fun. It's going to be so much more interesting, because you're going to be operating those big machines. Instead of like laying down every stone, every brick one by one, you're going to operate that machine that you can do an entire street with just 2 or 3 people at a time, right? And I think we're at that same moment in customer service and customer support. And that's why I'm saying, I'm from a different school, that I don't think that we'll automate everything away. I think we're automating everything to a higher level instead. And anyways, that's why I think I'm very optimistic and very bullish about the future of AI in many areas, but especially in customer service.
I really love your analogy about the workers in the street, because it's very fundamental. It's relatable. It's something that we can all think about. And what we can also do is, if you do take that as a framing and a way of thinking about it, then you have a purpose of how you want to implement this type of tooling, of what do we want it to be able to do, especially if we talk about prevention versus deflection. I think immediately what people's brains think or go to when they think about AI is, okay, I won't have these contacts anymore. Like, it'll do it for me. But that's not the case. What you're talking about is really...
It should not be the case, no.
It shouldn't be the case, right? If you think about, that's deflection, we're talking about prevention and being able to better that customer experience at a fundamental core level, so that we can deliver on those higher customer expectations as they grow. Like, why don't we have these things resolved in minutes? Everybody has the highest level of expectation that some of these big players, like you mentioned, have, that smaller organizations can now deliver on, or should be, I don't say should, but are expected to deliver on in that sense. Especially as you go from support as a like regular thing, like a necessary evil of an organization like it was, to
Yeah.
now your support being a differentiator and value
Yeah.
driver for your organization, right? That expectation, if it is a value proposition that we have this level of support,
Yeah.
you need to, that expectation is there and it's growing as well. I think it's very, very interesting.
No, and I think one of the other things is that a lot of teams will recognize that I mentioned earlier that you're basically the eyes and ears of the organization, right? Like many organizations, I think even smaller ones, are set up in such a way that not everyone in the company, or actually a relatively small percentage of people in the company, is able to interact with customers directly. Usually it's like sales and support and so on. And the rest of the company will have to hear from those teams what the customers actually think of the service or the product they're providing. And part of the solving that knowledge issue both ways is also like, hey, you're able to better detect trends. Like the AI can actually filter out the latest trends. And if you're a software developer, you want to know what the issues are with the latest software release. But if you're an e-commerce player, you want to know what people say about that new product you put in your store. Or if you're a fintech company, you want to hear if there's any challenges with whatever, transferring money or something like that. And you don't want to hear like 2 months later when people actually had the time to analyze the ticket and ask everyone about the trends and so. But you want to hear like at the end of the day, basically, or the same day, right? That you want to know like, oh, this is the weather forecast for, or this is the current temperature for my customers with our product and service, and then you can act on it. Like to bring it back, like customer service is going to be, I think, a very important funnel there between inside teams, let's say, and the customer. And yeah, that's why I believe that the work is getting so much more interesting, because you're no longer just chasing after closing every single ticket that comes in, but actually like preventing them and analyzing or like extracting the trends from those and converting them and translating them internally to helpful and useful nuggets of information that people can act upon, so that as an organization you become better, you become more customer focused to help customers out again. So,
and it begins with the mindset of how can we solve this in the first
Yeah,
place as well. We were
exactly.
talking about at the very, very beginning. And I think that opens up a whole nother conversation, which I think we'll save for another time, of what do you think that and I think maybe it's a good community discussion to have within, the space, is what does that mean for the competencies and skills that support reps will need to be able to deliver on that, which is a whole different conversation again, but very, very interesting to have. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thought process around it and everything. I really, really appreciate it. And I think it is a very, what are you going to do with it type of conversation. And I think it'll get a lot of people thinking about, are we implementing it in the right way? Am I thinking about it in the right way? In a more customer-centric way as well, and how we can start to grow and scale. I do ask everyone to wrap things up. Maybe the question that's coming?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've listened to the podcast a few times now, so yeah.
Wonderful. Perfect. So if you could share what's one thing that you've learned over the course of your career, I mean, having the pedigree that you do, that sticks with you today and that you still carry into your life today.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it depends a little bit on the kind of business that you're in, obviously, as well. And I've been in a position, like many people actually, that I am not dealing with forces of nature or the laws of physics or something. Like, I'm not trying to invent ways to go faster than light or to shoot a rocket to the moon, and I need to know what the escape velocity is or things like this. Like, I've always been dealing throughout my life, actually, and throughout my career, with human-made problems, as I call them. Right? Like, if you're supporting software or you're supporting like in fintech, for example, they're all human-made things, right? Like, we invented them, we designed them, we created them as humans. So I'm always saying, like, look, we're facing human-made problems, and these can be solved with human-made solutions also if you run into any problems. And that's something I always an advice I always hold dear, because you sometimes feel, even in big organizations, that there's the resistance to change, or things work the way they are and something is broken but we can't change it. And people talk about it as if it were a force of nature, as if it's that speed of light that we can't break through because it doesn't, or not yet at least, exists, right? But instead, I always say, like, look, it's a human-made problem that this is broken or it's not working well. So we need a human-made solution as well to make it better. And I think I always tell myself that to get into that mindset of, like, okay, what can we do individually or collectively to make it better? And what can I contribute to that? And how can I get other people to contribute to that as well? And if you approach things that way, I think you'll find out that there's actually very few things in the world that cannot be solved, right? Like that way, most things that you run into, most problems that we run into on a daily basis can be solved. It's just a matter of figuring out how and working your way towards it. So that's why I always my career advice, let's say, that I keep with me all the time.
I love that, because then you also then what you mentioned before, start thinking about it more creatively in terms
Yeah.
of being able to geek this in. I always thought about it as I always talk to my reps about this in terms of like customer versus company,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, we're all people and humans talking to humans.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
I've never framed it in this way of like human problems and human solutions, because it's the same aspect, right? You're just a person talking to another person. We're all living life. We're all in the same thing. But what you mentioned is we created it. We can solve it. It's just about how you go about it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight and sharing your
You're welcome.
experience. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Thanks again. Looking forward to the summary of all the answers to that last final question you had.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm also very curious.
Cool. Thanks, Neil. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.